Okay, hello my friends. Today we're going to be doing a really important video. This is another kind of philosophical type video on what I would consider to be one of the most crucial and essential topics that's kind of centered around and what inspired my business model for Ambioc, which is today we're going to be talking about what it means to be an evolved human, what I would consider to be an evolved human, kind of what that means, why it's important, as well as what we can do to get ourselves there. So I actually kind of made this little brainstorming flow chart deal, which I'll be linking a picture of that in the description. But essentially, I just kind of wanted to break down, in my opinion, what it would mean for somebody to be an evolved or a progressed human being, and some of the kind of subcategories that are the most important and that should be focused on when we're thinking about this, and kind of how do we get there, and things that we need to be thinking about that we can improve in our lives and about ourselves so that we can get to a point where we are self-sufficient, selfless, creative, intelligent beings, so that we can kind of create a world together that is, I'm not going to say free of suffering, but where we minimize suffering and we improve our existence, and it's interesting and fun and exciting to be alive, because I think that that's super important, and I think that that's where I hope where we are headed as a species once we get through this little hiccup here that we have of this goofiness that's going on in the world right now. So as far as kind of how I guess I broke this down, or how I wanted to think about this in my mind, and why I created this little brainstorming chart, if you will, is that it's, again, centered around what I would call an evolved human. And the reason that I kind of chose that term is that I think that as human beings, we're on a journey. This is a progression, both kind of in our individual personal lives, but also I think it goes beyond that, where we, you could either kind of look at it from an evolutionary standpoint of possibly a progression of even millions of years of change, or you could also look at it from a more spiritual standpoint of maybe past lives and things like that. And I'm not going to really be getting that much into belief and stuff like that. And I don't even really care what you believe. What you believe is what you believe, and that's fine. But I think that regardless of what you do believe and how you think that all of this works, I think it's important to recognize that, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 8 years old. Of course not. I mean, I have now a few decades of life experience that has shaped me into who I am. And so that's why I chose the word evolved human. But the other reason why I want us to be kind of getting to think about this is that I think that it's super important for us to realize that, I don't want to say that there's some place that we're trying to get, or some state of being necessarily that we're trying to get to, but I think we could probably all agree that we should be improving ourselves and helping each other improve ourselves, and getting to a point where, the vast majority of us are, again, intelligent, creative, caring beings, right? I mean, that's the mark of being a human, right? I mean, if you're not, then, I mean, what separates you from an animal? Not that animals are bad or evil, but I mean, animals are selfish. They're living out of survival. It's a really brutal world that clearly us as human beings are kind of separating from and are not entangled with anymore, right? I mean, we're not really living in the world of tooth and claw anymore, because at this point we've progressed enough to where we don't have to, and that's obviously a huge blessing. So, but that being said, just because we've gotten to the point where life is pretty comfortable and we're not worried about survival on a day-to-day basis and all that stuff, doesn't mean that we should stop, right? So we're still evolving, and we need to keep going, because it's not going to stop anytime soon. And I think that eventually we're probably going to get to places or get to states of being that we probably can't even imagine now. But okay, so I want to just really briefly talk also about why is it so important. And that's kind of crucial when we're talking about becoming an evolved being. Well, a lot of people might say, well, so what? Like, why? What's the point of that? So one of the most, I think, important and driving factors for becoming an evolved human being is that it will greatly minimize suffering in this world. That is one of the biggest problems and travesties that is plaguing this world, is that this world is so full of suffering that it's almost, you almost can't even wrap your mind around it. And a lot of that comes from ignorance and people being unevolved and misguided and unable to properly navigate and handle what life is throwing at us. And as an evolved human being, a human being who has mastery over his or her emotions and is non-reactive, is self-sufficient, is caring and loving and connected with other human beings in a very symbiotic and powerful way, you could see how that might minimize suffering, right? Where we're there to help each other, we're there to be there for each other. If you have someone treat you poorly in a relationship or something, you don't allow that to completely consume your life and allow those emotions to just completely tear you apart. Because again, as an evolved human, you have more of a mastery over those emotions and you kind of more let them run their course through you without just tearing you up, if that makes sense. And that's just one little example, and I've got a bunch of them here that I'm going to be going through. But that's one of the biggest reasons why it's so important for us to become an evolved human, is to minimize suffering. Another reason is that we will make life way more interesting. And the reason for that is, and that's one of my main kind of subcategories here, is that we will tap into our creativity. And that's one of the things that's really really missing from the world today in a lot of ways, is that I think there's not enough emphasis on creativity, and most of us, and myself included to an extent, are not focusing enough on creating things and expressing ourselves, and instead we focus on consuming, right? So we're just watching shows and we're doing all this stuff, we're going out and drinking and to be entertained or whatever it is, but we're not really creating anything. And when we, again, as evolved beings, are focusing more on creativity, then we're putting out more awesome content and just exciting, interesting art or films or videos like this one that I'm trying to create for you right now. And it creates just so much more that's out there for us to enjoy for and with each other. So that's kind of another reason why becoming an evolved human is so important. I think another, and I guess I'll just probably give one more kind of crucial point to why it's so important to be an evolved human, and that is, again, overcoming that challenge of survival. Obviously, we're all here to make it, we're all working jobs and making money and doing all that stuff so we can feed ourselves and our family and take care of ourselves, pay the bills, right? All that stuff. Well, as an evolved human, or as a progressed being who has spent potentially decades on themselves, growing and facing challenges, all that good stuff, you will naturally get better at survival, because you will have better techniques on how to deal with people, how to deal with frustrating and challenging people. You will have more ideas and knowledge of how to make money. All that stuff, right? So you're going to be better equipped to deal with the challenges of survival. And then ideally, hopefully, you will find a way to help others to get to that point, or to share that knowledge and expertise when it gets to the point where you are very comfortable, or maybe, either money's not an issue for you anymore, or you just have gotten kind of so good at what you do that there's almost really nothing left to do except to share that knowledge and expertise. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas of why it's so important for us to truly work on ourselves and become better humans, and as much as possible. I will also preface by saying, and I'm going to annoy the heck out of you guys because I'm going to keep saying this as we go through the video, but I am not, perfect, not even close. I'm not anywhere close to where I would like to be. I have so much to work on myself and get better at that it's almost not even funny. So, of course, this is not a holier than thou type of lecture or anything like this. This is just kind of my own ideas of why I think this is important. I have spent a lot of time on myself, especially just living alone for several years now, and I've always been a very introspective person and all that good stuff. So I've kind of focused maybe a little bit more than most people on trying to improve as a person, and that's become very important to me. And it's shown me from a result standpoint of why it's so important and what it can do for us. So it's not a preaching type thing. It's really just me trying to share with folks why I think it's so important, and also why it's so important to me in this company, right? I mean, me starting this company from an idea, and one of the main ideas was that I wanted to try to help people become a better version of themselves, for both themselves and for the community, right? I mean, that's super important. And so this is one of the most crucial topics that would be centered around that. And as my company hopefully progresses and evolves too and improves, that's going to be one of those topics that I'm going to be really trying to focus on and integrate with whatever it is, even if it's my classes, even if it's when I'm teaching CPR and first aid. This is going to be a topic that I'm going to be trying to integrate and inspire people to, don't just get CPR and first aid training because your job requires it. Get it because it's an important thing and you could literally save someone's life someday, right? So stuff like that, and that's kind of really what I want to focus on. So that being said, I'm trying to decide the order that I want to do this in. So I'm going to start with, again, so I have 5 subcategories, kind of main big subcategories of what I would consider are probably the most important and crucial aspects to focus on in order to improve yourself and your being, right? So the first one would be physical strength and conditioning. Now, I would hope, at least to an extent, that it would be kind of obvious why this is important, right? I would hope. Hopefully your mind's kind of already, the gears are turning a little bit and you're thinking of how that would tie in to being an evolved or progressed human, right? A developed person. Excuse me. One of the most important reasons, for obvious reasons, why physical strength and conditioning is so important to being an evolved and progressed human is just health, right? I mean, that is an important factor of being healthy. And I think we pretty much all know, for the most part, how and why that works, right? I mean, if you never do any cardio, you never challenge your heart or anything like that, your heart is a muscle and it wants to be used and exercised. And if you don't do that, then it's never going to get that use that it needs. And eventually it's going to crap out on you, right? And if you are, super overweight, or you eat really crappy food, or whatever it is, that some of these factors that we know are unhealthy, then that is going to have a detrimental effect on you, which will eventually have a detrimental effect on your family and the people that you care about. There's a huge list of negative health benefits when it comes to, when it comes to being overweight. And that's one of the main examples that I'm kind of focusing on right now, as far as obviously the opposite of being, in shape, right? And I'm not trying to, shame anyone. If that's where you're at, it's where you're at. It's not a big deal. But one of the biggest issues that I'm having lately that it's really disturbing me, and I'm honestly really sick of it, is I'm sick of seeing this, like, I don't know what it is, if you want to call it fatism, or this, like, it's kind of almost like a pro-fatness movement, and it's super concerning. I've been seeing that especially a lot online and in certain kind of demographics and stuff lately. And I do not at all think that we should be shaming fat people or anything like that, but I really think it's a serious mistake to delude ourselves into pretending that that is beautiful or even a good thing, because it's just not. There are no benefits to being obese or really overweight. There's a ton of downsides, especially medically speaking. And it's just simply not good for you. And as evolved and progressed human beings, we need to be, we should want to live a long time, and we should want to be here. We should enjoy our time here. And so naturally, we would want to extend that time, right? And that's not going to happen if you're obese. Your time will be severely limited here as opposed to someone that's not. So that's where that conditioning comes into play, and it takes work and effort. It's not easy, as is all of this stuff here. And there's not a single topic on this little brainstorming sheet that I have that does not take work and effort, because that's the central key aspect of becoming an evolved human being, is that you have to put serious work in, and the less that you do, pretty much for the most part, you're gonna be, I don't even want to necessarily say down, because that's not necessarily correct. It doesn't make you a better person than someone who is less evolved, right? It doesn't make you a better person. But I think that we could agree that, again, like I said before, it helps us minimize suffering. We can tackle challenges together better. We can be more creative, all that good stuff. So I think that this is super important. So as far as some of the other categories that are important when thinking about physical strength and conditioning, obviously there's a lot of different options to kind of get there, right? To be where you have more of a command of your body, and you're able to perform better with whatever it is, whether it's just doing a pull-up or whatever. So there's resistance training, there's body weight kind of calisthenics type stuff. There's like CrossFit, there's just doing certain sports or activities. Rock climbing, right? Rock climbing in itself, the whole goal is you're scaling a cliff face or whatever it is, and that's all that you're doing, is you're just trying to get up that face. But naturally, it builds that strength. It builds your back strength and your shoulder strength and your arm strength and all that good stuff. And so that's a excellent byproduct from having that hobby. And of course, almost everyone who does it enjoys it. It's a fun thing to do. So picking up some hobbies like that have a beneficial factor to them is huge. On top of that, we have diet and rest. So make no mistake, you'll see a lot of folks who, especially are big gym rats. I'm a big gym nut. That's kind of my main focus of physical activity. So a lot of people that are gym rats, especially like in college and stuff, myself included, will hit the weight super hard, spend 2 hours at the gym, and then they'll go home and they'll eat pizza and drink beer, and then they will freaking eat some Adderall and stay up all night studying for their exam, and then not get any sleep. And then they kind of wonder why either they're getting no results, or they feel like crap, or whatever it is. So when it comes to physical strength and conditioning and taking care of our body, it goes beyond the actual physical exercise. Diet and sleep are as important, if not more important, than the actual physical activity that you do. So what you put in your mouth is huge and determines what your body's going to be able to utilize and how it's going to manifest itself, right? It's kind of like the equivalent of, if you want it's kind of like the fuel that you put in your car. If you want your car to be able to go and operate well, you need to put some good and efficient fuel in it. And then as far as the rest goes, and obviously, of course, there's plenty of data and information that you guys can Google as far as how that works. Most of you are probably quite aware that when you close your eyes and you go to sleep, that's when our body is able to start kind of some of the healing processes, and that's kind of almost when our body kicks into overdrive. And a lot of these processes are super important to the rebuilding process, building muscle, all that good stuff, and even losing fat. So I'll take another drink here. So we have one more subcategory, or excuse me, one more kind of little small point for this subcategory, for this physical strength and conditioning. And this is one of the reasons why is it so important to be, in good physical shape. And one of them is emergencies. And one of the examples, and I know I'm bringing up the obese thing again, but this is an example that I always think about. And again, I'm really not trying to shame or hate on obese people, but this is a real example that's important to think about. What if you are on an airplane and something bad happens and you are on let's say the window seat, and you have an extremely obese person, next to you, maybe in the middle seat or the aisle seat. If something bad happens and everyone needs to go off that plane, this person next to you is a liability. That person is not an asset. That person is not going to be helpful in that situation. They're going to be an obstacle, and they're going to be someone who's who's going to need help, and they're going to be much harder to save. And they're going to potentially trap you, and you could even get in big trouble for that. So that's an issue. That's not how an evolved being would be. An evolved being, or someone who is developed and progressed and at kind of their peak value to themselves and society, a person like that would be an asset. A person like that would be strong and in shape. Their cardio would be good. So if something like that happened, they're not the person who's in the way or the person who's too weak to be able to do anything. They're the person who's grabbing other people and getting them off the plane, showing them where to go and helping them, carrying them if they need to, right? I mean, that's what someone like that would be. And that's also a reason why, our police and our firefighters and our military people all have PT requirements, right? And unfortunately, some of that stuff's not as strict as it should be, especially with the police and even firefighters, especially the police, right? I mean, we've got definitely some out of shape police officers in this country, which is, in my opinion, an issue. I mean, they shouldn't allow themselves to let go that much, because then they're just not, they can't be as of service as they should be, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's so important, is in emergency situations, whatever it may be, you need to be in shape. I mean, I remember a story that one of my good friends, Casey, told me, and he's in good shape. He's always been in good shape. And they were at a lake back when we were in school over in Fort Collins area, and they were at a lake with some friends, and one of the friends had a small dog, and the small dog got bit in the face by a rattlesnake. And I think they kind of witnessed it happen, so they knew what had gone down, and they knew that they basically needed to get this dog out of there. Well, these guys were a mile to a mile and a half at least on the other side of this lake, away from the parking lot and all that stuff. So my friend had to grab this little dog and basically sprint or run very fast with this dog in his arm for a mile and a half to get to the car, while everyone else was trying to catch up behind him. And get to the hospital and try to save it, which super sad story, but unfortunately the dog did not make it. It basically died in his arms, which is quite unfortunate. But in that case, someone who was severely out of shape, they just simply couldn't have done it. And these types of emergencies and things happen. I mean, I also had a story from someone I know really recently where her family's, it's technically her younger brother, her half younger brother, had to be basically carried and ran to the hospital, which was 5 to 8 blocks away, so it's not that far. But he was having some breathing problems. He was basically stopping breathing. And so his parents had to run with him to the hospital in their arms. And it's just kind of another one of those scenarios where these things don't happen often, but they do happen. And I don't know about you, but I much rather be prepared for that and feel ready to tackle those challenges and those scary situations. And one thing that I promise, I guarantee will help you feel more prepared is if you are physically in shape. So that's what I'm going to leave that at. So that's that first subcategory, right? So let's get into self-sufficiency now. So I think self-sufficiency is super important. I'm a big proponent of that. I live off grid on 40 acres out here near Montrose, Colorado. And I am not remotely, completely self-sufficient. I don't really think anyone is, to be honest with you. We still require to be able to rely on certain things from society, right? Like I can't just go create a part that my Jeep needs. I can't just go and create a drive shaft and make one because that's ridiculous, right? So there's certain things that if my drive shaft breaks, which has happened, by the way, on my vehicle. So there's certain things that we cannot individually do, and that's fine. But it's super important for us to be less reliant on the government or big companies or power companies or whatever it is. The more that we are reliant on these things, we're just at mercy when they go wrong or when they don't serve us the way that we want, right? I mean, you probably know how it feels if you were to just go out tonight, this evening, and not even take your cell phone. I mean, you would probably have like half of a panic attack, right? I would, and that's honestly pretty ridiculous. But we've gotten to the point where we're so attached to our phones and other things that it's not healthy anymore. So we need to find ways to minimize and mitigate that, and especially mitigate and minimize our reliance on the government and on these big companies and other entities that have just shown us that we can't rely on them. And I'm sorry, we just can't. And I know that that's true. And if you try to argue it's not or pretend like it's not, well, then you're just lying to yourself. It's true. We cannot rely on these people. And we can't even really say that they have our best interest in mind. These entities, whether they're big giant companies, Apple or Amazon or whatever it is, they have a primary driving factor, and that's essentially money. They want to have as much money and typically in power and control as possible. And I'm not saying that every company out there is evil or anything ridiculous like that, but that is going to be the driving factor of their decision. And when that's the case, if something goes wrong in our life, or whatever individually, then, you can't rely on them to have your back because they might not. Insurance company. What if something goes terribly wrong in your life and the insurance company that you've been paying, just as they typically do, decides they don't want to pay for it? Well, if you rely on that, if you rely on them and just assume that they're going to have your back, well, then that might not turn out how you want it to. So hopefully you're seeing my point with that. So that's why it's super important that we're self-sufficient so that we can take care of ourselves and our family and each other better. And the more that we're having other people rely on us, again, kind of like that example that I brought up with the physical conditioning, then again, we're a liability instead of an asset. Whereas when we're self-sufficient, then we can help. We can help our friends and family. I've got buddies who help me out when I, maybe don't have a tool that I need or something like that, and they help me out. Or the other night, I actually got a roadkill deer, and my friend Trevor was kind enough, my neighbor, to come help me load it up in the truck because I couldn't get it in there myself. So this deer had just gotten hit by another vehicle, and I wanted to harvest some meat because the meat was perfectly good and fresh. So my friend came and helped me load it up in the back of my truck, and then we drove to my house real quick. It was like 10 at night. And he was nice enough to help me quarter it up really quick, which didn't take long at all, like 30 minutes. And then I was able to take it to the processor. So stuff like that's really cool. And then, of course, I've always been more than happy to do favors for him. I've got a 2-post lift in my shop, and I let him bring his vehicle over anytime he needs to use that or whatever else that I can help with. I'm always happy to return the favor. So that's kind of where we get into, again, being more of an asset than a liability, where we can help each other out, we can be there for each other, and we have that kind of expertise and experience and will to do that. So as far as what I would say it kind of means to be self-sufficient, or how can we kind of improve that in our own life? I think one of the most important things is to have a shop or a garage or something like that, some sort of space where you have tools and you have kind of things of that nature where you can essentially fix problems that you're going to run into, right? Whether it's vehicle problems or it's problems with your home or anything of that nature. It's the same thing. If you're reliant on a plumber all the time or whatever it is, you're limiting yourself in your ability to fix the problems that you have in your life. And you might get to the point where things might get so bad and busy with plumbers or whatever, where they're so busy you can't even get help from them for 2 weeks. And what if you have something that's an emergency? So again, no one's expecting you to be a master plumber and a master mechanic or anything like that, but you need to have some basic knowledge of how to fix some of the common issues that you might run into in your life, and how to change your own car's oil or whatever it is. And the nice thing about that is, if you can do your own car oil, or do your own brakes on your car or something like that, then you're going to save money. It's going to, yes, take up some of your time for sure, and that's definitely one of the downsides and challenges with it. But you're also going to save kind of the time and the trip and the logistics of having to take it to a shop, which is always a pain in the ass. And especially nowadays, they're so busy that it takes days or whatever it takes. You got to drop it off, and then you got to find another car to use, right? It's always a pain in the butt. So that's kind of one of the benefits of being able to do these things yourself too. Another, what I would say, really important kind of aspect of living or being self-sufficient is either living off-grid or some, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe not living fully off-grid, but partly, if that makes sense. So maybe you have some solar panels, but you're kind of connected to the grid, but at least you're getting power from that, and you're getting some of your money back, or even maybe covering all of your bills with those solar panels. Or maybe you have a generator as a backup, where you're not living fully off-grid, but if the power gets knocked out, then you have a backup system, right? So there's kind of these measures in place and things that you have that are kind of taking some of that reliance out of the picture, right? Because if you're fully reliant on the grid, well, when the grid goes down, what happens? Then you live on a well and have a well pump. You won't have water, right? All that good stuff. So having in my opinion, the more off-grid, pretty much the better that you can be, because then there's just less. You're your own system, and it doesn't matter. The whole grid could go off in the entire country, and at least I would still have power, which is actually pretty cool. And the more of us that are like that, then the more we're all able to take care of ourselves. Because right now, if you just have one person who's off-grid here and one here and yada yada, then everyone who's not wants to flock and basically use those services when something bad happens or when the power's out. So then you still have kind of a weak point there, or it's still kind of inefficient, if that makes sense, right? So as evolved beings, once again, we living off grid and kind of being able to support ourselves and be almost totally reliant on ourselves is a way better option. And of course, once again, how an intelligent and wise creature would carry itself, right? And that being said, I'm going to segue that into having your own garden or your own food supply, or being able to procure your own food and even water. So I myself have not gotten into the gardening yet. I need to. I've got a greenhouse that's being built right now that I'm almost done with, that I'm going to be mostly taking advantage of this next year and starting to learn some of the gardening stuff and all that. But it's super important, and for obvious reasons, right? I mean, if for whatever reason we get to the point where we can't get food, which, by the way, might be coming, folks, so stay tuned for that. But if we get to the point where we have food supply issues or anything like that, well, what's the obvious answer to that? Being able to produce that for yourself. And the thing with these type, you know, whether it's living off grid or providing your own garden or even being in shape or whatever, is these kind of take a lot of time. They're kind of skills that, in my opinion, you have to basically cultivate over years, right? It's not going to happen overnight. So you don't want to be that person who's buying the giant seed supply and scrambling and all the toilet paper, of course, right, when everything's going bad or seems to be getting scary. We want to be naturally building this progression just when the nature of things or society is totally stable, because it's not always going to be stable. And you want to already have these skill sets in place. You want to already be comfortable. You know, you want to already be comfortable with gardening and know how that works and know how to grow food. So that way you're not trying to teach yourself on the fly during maybe even a time of crisis, right? And we all know that that's very possible. It's happened many times in history, and it's quite possible that it's about to happen now. I mean, we're kind of already seeing a lot of signs and red flags that that's what's going on. So we should be all, you know, you should have a little kind of almost warning antenna that should be at red mode right now, in my opinion. If it's not, then I would urge you to consider looking more into the signs of what's happening with the economy and politically and all that stuff right now, because there's a lot of not good signs going on right now. So, one second. Sorry if that's annoying hearing me drink the water, but I gotta do it here when I'm talking for so long, nonstop. The last point that I wanted to discuss as far as self-sufficiency, again, this is self-sufficiency, is the ability to defend yourself. And this might seem like a little bit of a weird kind of addition, and it's definitely a different topic from what we were just talking about. But if one is going to be self-sufficient, I mean, that term quite literally means kind of able to sustain oneself, right? Well, you also need to be able to sustain your health and your physical being. And unfortunately, quite unfortunately, we live in a world that is full of psychopaths and crazy people and mean people and bad people. And there's obviously a ton of awesome folks and good people out there, but there's a lot of bad people out there. And having that ability to defend ourselves is just yet another, and our family and our friends, that's yet another important step of being an evolved being. An evolved being is not a passive, weak, little spineless worm. And for anyone who this would potentially reach, who is kind of in the, what do I want to say? Gosh, I'm not thinking of the term right now for some silly reason, but just the latest kind of spiritual movements that have been going on. You know, there's a lot of kind of, I hate to say it, but kind of BS, fake wokeism, spiritual crap, where it kind of, the people fall into the trap of thinking that, you know, being a higher being means that you're, you know, everything's all good, man, and you don't need to ever worry about anything. Just think about positivity and everything will be fine. Well, that doesn't happen when you're about to be raped by someone who has some very nasty intentions for you. So it doesn't matter if you're thinking about positivity and you're trying to be positive when something really bad is about to happen and is inevitably going to happen. That's out of your control. What's in your control is your ability to be able to defend yourself and get training and learn from people who know what they're doing and have that kind of effort and will to put in the work to, excuse me, sorry, my mouth's getting dry again, to have those skill sets. And it's just like everything else on this list where it's not going to just magically manifest. It's not going to just appear, and you can't just watch a Hollywood movie and watch some superheroes fighting and now all of a sudden you know what you're doing. It doesn't work that way. So getting some real training, whether it's jiu-jitsu or boxing and doing some sparring, taking a concealed carry class and learning how firearms work and how to defend yourself with one of those. There's a ton of great options out there. Self-defense for women, situational awareness, all that good stuff. I highly, highly recommend that you take these classes, teach yourself. You might be surprised what you learn. You also might be surprised, especially women and smaller people. You might be surprised just how naturally defenseless you really are. Honestly, it's just kind of the sad nature of how we are. I watched a really interesting video that I really liked his perspective on it. John Lovell from Warrior Poet Society, who I fully support. I really like those guys and their content a lot. And he's got a little bit where he's talking about how feminism is kind of almost anti-women, and it's kind of like one of those very not popular, almost clickbait title, right? But he actually makes a good case where he talks about how these movies and stuff like that, like these Hollywood movies, are just giving women an unrealistic picture, an idea of essentially what they're capable of. And he's kind of talking about, there's like this one movie where some superhero chick has got some, full-grown man pinned against a wall, and she's like super flexible, so she has her leg all the way up, and she has like her foot with like her high heel, I think pinning this guy by the throat against a wall. And I mean, he's a full-grown man, right? But I mean, it's kind of one of those things where then his case is essentially saying that women will kind of see that and maybe even subconsciously kind of fall into a trap of thinking that they would be able to defend themselves more easily than is actually what's happening in reality. And so the further example that he used is talking about how he had a friend of his who was a gal. She's a little bit, early 20s female, who kind of had fallen, she admitted on the video that she'd kind of fallen prey to some of that mentality. And so what he offered to do with her was to essentially almost have kind of like a jiu-jitsu session, kind of like a, not physical hitting, but grappling type thing with her, where she was trying to kind of just see what she could do, and he was just trying to show her some moves, because she also just wanted to learn some moves about how to defend herself and protect herself against an attacker. And essentially, how that all played out was he was able to show her very easily just how simple and effortless it was for him to, for lack of a better term, manhandle her and throw her around. And he essentially could have done whatever he wanted with her. And if he was an attacker with really bad intentions, of course, that scenario could play out very poorly. So that's kind of one of those things where it's important for us, myself included, and anyone, to be aware of where we're at physically, what our abilities are. I mean, of course, you see the classic, right? The guy, the drunk guy at the bar who thinks he's just super hot shit and, is talking BS and trying to start stuff with people. Having that self-awareness and knowing kind of what you're capable of. And that's one of the coolest and best things about boxing or jiu-jitsu, is that you get humbled really quick, and you learn that just because you've seen all these stupid movies and stuff that make you think that you're tough and make you think that you're able to just, beat up most people or whatever. When you get into boxing or jiu-jitsu or any kind of real physical contact sport like that, you start to learn really quick that you're not as tough as you thought you are. You're not as in shape as you thought you were. And there's a lot of people out there that are training this stuff, and they're good at it, and they can run circles around you quite literally and figuratively. So that being said, again, being an evolved human being, I think it's super important to be able to protect ourselves, and not only for ourselves, but our families too. When we get in these scenarios where, you know, maybe someone's even trying to attack your family, or someone's trying to attack your daughter, or whatever it is. Rhetorical question. I mean, what do you think an evolved human being or a progressed being would be in that scenario? Do you think that an evolved being would be someone who couldn't handle that scenario? Someone who got scared and wimped out? Or someone who, no, it's just all love and light, man. It's all good. Like, don't even worry about it, when someone's like trying to abduct your daughter in front of you? Or do you think an evolved being would be someone who recognizes the value of human life and fights to protect it when necessary? I hope that answer is obvious to you. It is to me. So I've got two more main categories. I'm going to go fill up this water super quickly because I'm thirsty and I'm out. So just give me 1 second and then I will be right back. Okay, ooh, loudy. My mouth was dry. That was getting annoying. Okay, so my last two main categories that I think are super important to cover is, the first one that I'm going to hit on is creativity. So I kind of mentioned this before a little bit. I think one of the biggest factors that, again, separates us as human beings from all of our friends in the animal kingdom is that we are creative beings. That's one of the most important parts of being a human. We, as human beings, I mean, we need to express ourselves. We need to create things. And I think that that's one of the answers to this kind of depression plague that has been slamming human beings for a number of years now. And I think there's a reason for that. And one of the biggest reasons that I think exists is that we have kind of created a society and a lifestyle and an expectation of how humans should live that does not foster creativity. And I also think that, you know, our schools and all that stuff, I don't think that they put enough emphasis on creativity, and they don't really show us enough of how to truly be creative in a way that can be practical and helpful to, you know, ourselves and our community, right? I mean, they touch on it a little bit in school, you know, as far as showing us how to paint something or whatever it is that they kind of start teaching us in school. But then the issue comes where they kind of, things become very rigid, and there's kind of this expectation of you to, you know, get through high school, and then the almost certain expectation after that is to go to college, and then after that to get a job with the primary focus of making money, right, to be able to support yourself, which of course those are important things, but there's kind of a very rigid structure and limited framework that they start to kind of pump, for lack of a better term, kind of pump into our heads, to where I don't think they don't focus enough on how we can truly be creative, where we can start to really think outside the box and find what maybe our true internal skills are individually as a person. Because there's some people out there, you know, let's take like autistic people, for example. Like, those types of people are probably never going to be able to, you know, work a job or make a living off of being like super outgoing and people-centered, you know, maybe something like real estate or something. I mean, because it's just, they don't operate that way. But that being said, people who are autistic can be extremely, almost scary smart, especially in a computational way. So they have their own set of skill sets and personality traits that need to be nurtured and expressed in a way that they can enjoy and that they can make money off of, and that can be bring something useful to society, right? So that being said, kind of like I said before, as far as creativity goes, we really need to focus individually on creating and not consuming. We've become such a culture of consuming things that it's seriously detrimental to ourselves and our health and the nature of our world. When all we do is consume, I mean, obviously we're consuming more resources and products, right, which is not good for the earth at all. creates more trash. It depletes the earth of those resources, all that stuff. So we're consuming too much. The other downside of that is it's expensive, right? So we're spending unnecessary amounts of money, myself included. Again, this is not holier than thou. Myself included, we spend too much money on, kind of trivial things and things that we just think are cool. Oh, I have to have that. I saw it on Etsy or whatever, right? So we're spending too much money. And then the other thing with consuming is there's a mental health aspect to it where it's kind of almost turns into like a dopamine hit, and it doesn't create lasting happiness for us. What does is creating. So people who are artists, and whether it's, they do digital art or painting, or maybe they create music, or they create films. I got a buddy here in town. He does some awesome work creating films for businesses and stuff around here, like really professional, marketing type films and stuff like that. Anything of that nature, obviously, is much more positive, has better impacts on ourselves and society. Taps into that kind of inner need that we have to create. And I think it is better for our mental health. You can find ways to make potentially a lot of money if you really are good at what you do. And once again, thinking of it from an evolved human being standpoint, I always kind of just like to keep asking that rhetorical question of what would an evolved being be like? Would it be a consuming, little being that never brings anything to the table? Or would it be a smart and interesting and funny creature that creates things of those nature, that expresses and creates a product or a vision or something out of nothing and puts that out into the universe or into the world for others to enjoy? I think that's what an evolved human being would do, right? And so one of the most important reasons for why I think it's also so important for us to be creative beings is not just because it's, mentally healthy for us or that it's fun, but also it can help us solve issues both in our lives individually as well as, societal problems. So we can start to create innovative and helpful products that can solve even serious issues. I mean, you got to think about the whole medical industry and how all of that has progressed and how that it used to be almost non-existent. I mean, right? They used to put leeches on your skin to fix wounds and stuff, which of course seems ridiculous, but they did. But once we started to get into, antiseptics and stuff like that were invented, right? I mean, that literally took creativity for someone to invent that. Or when you think about numbing agents like lidocaine, which, just think about doing a surgery with no numbing agent. It'd be awful. Well, that was an issue that people recognized that took creativity to solve and find some sort of product or create something that could fix that problem, right? So that's where creativity comes into play. And the other thing about creativity is it's easy to always expect and think that others are going to do it, but somebody had to create that. Somebody had to go out of their way and have the will or the drive or the interest to fix that problem. And a lot of times it comes from, people's personal experiences. I mean, I've heard stories of people whose grandfather suffered from Alzheimer's and started losing his memory, and they basically watched their grandfather essentially mentally deteriorate, and it disturbed them so much that they decided to get into a field of studying Alzheimer's, and with the intent of course, trying to combat that disease or find a way to have it lessen its effects on someone or whatever it is, which is awesome, right? So that's where some of that stuff seems to stem from. But I think that we need to just focus on encouraging each other and ourselves more to tap into that creativity. And when we get home after work, instead of going home and just watching TV and kind of zoning out and numbing ourselves and drinking a beer and just watching some show, well, all you're doing is you're consuming something that somebody else created, and you're not really getting anything of value from that. You're not getting anything that's improving you as a person or anyone else. You're just watching this thing to be entertained. And I'm not saying that obviously that you can't ever do that, but when that's all that people do, well, they're not contributing anything of value to themselves or to society, right? So instead, get home and work on something. Work on a woodworking project. Make a desk. And even if you need to, sell it, and make some money off of it. Cool. Well, you just made some money and you got to tap into that creative outlet and probably enjoyed doing it, probably had fun doing it, and everything about it is good, right? So that being said, I think that's probably sufficient to cover creativity. Obviously, super, super important topic, and really central and vital to being an evolved human. So the last little bit that I wanted to talk about, and this is certainly the most important one, I think, and this is a huge, I could spend 3 hours just talking about this alone. I'll probably, in the future, do some more videos kind of diving more deeply into each of these topics, but for now, I'm just kind of trying to scratch the surface. But the last topic that I've got here that I think is probably the most important one is what I would consider to be having a strong and developed mind. So the reason that I think that's so important is because obviously we are very much, thinking, mindful beings, if you will. That's, again, one of the biggest things that separates us from our little animal friends is that we have a mind, we have a brain, and we're able to make choices. We're able to think about things. We're able to contemplate and decide and choose actions based on that. Whereas animals are essentially, from as far as I can tell, they're just basically impulsive creatures that just react to the environment around them. They can't contemplate. They can't think about things or even just enjoy things or understand why maybe something is funny or whatever it is, because they don't have a mind like we do. So that being said, I've got a number of small topics to cover on this one. They're all very important. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on them. I know I'm already going to be about an hour with this video, but I knew that that was going to be the case regardless. But okay, so the first, gosh, where to even start here? Let's start with meditation. So, meditation is, oh gosh, it's one of the most important things as far as having a healthy mind. And I can kind of already probably see a lot of the folks that are more kind of tuned in and interested to what I'm doing here because of guns and all that stuff. I think a lot of, folks that are maybe, more conservative leaning or however you want to put it politically, that are into all the guns and all that stuff, are really missing the mark and limiting themselves by thinking that meditation is just woo-woo BS, or that yoga or whatever it is, kind of more of that hippie type stuff is just woo-woo and a waste of time. And they're really doing themselves a disservice because it's actually some of the most important stuff you can do for yourself. Meditation is huge, and the reason why it's so important is because it turns up that introspective, reflective, skill set that you need to be able to develop so that you're not just doing things impulsively, you're not just reacting, you have more control over your mind as opposed to your mind and your thoughts having control over you. That's essentially, in my opinion, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, benefit of meditation. And it also kind of slows down. You can teach yourself how to slow down your brain and stop all of the crazy, erratic thoughts that come in, and you can teach yourself to be more present, less scatterbrain. There's so many benefits of it, and I'll let you guys Google that if you aren't aware, I'll let you look that up. But that's all, obviously, all of it's backed by studies and data that they're coming out with. Meditation has so many benefits, it's almost ridiculous. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on that, but that is one that is super important. That's basically going to tie into almost all the other ones too. So the next one that I have here is the occult and the esoteric. And for those of you that are not aware, this is another topic that a lot of folks kind of more on the right side or conservative or whatever also are doing themselves a disservice and are really honestly not that aware of, in my opinion. more so people on the left or kind of more hippie type or whatever seem to be more aware of kind of the occult and the esoteric aspect of life, which is huge and should not be ignored. So what the occult means, and this is mostly for you folks on the right, you gun tooting folks, the occult does not mean the devil, doesn't have anything to do with the devil. All that word means is hidden. So the occult basically means something that's hidden from view. So the occult and the esoteric has to do with basically hidden information, clandestine information, or symbols or patterns or whatever it is. So if you ever get into it and you start to study it and really learn about it from a genuine, curious place, then you will learn that essentially there is an entire world that is basically buried beneath our surface world. So our surface world of, society and I don't even know how to put it, but basically we live in a very surface level reality that most people, that's really all they can see. Most people kind of almost have like blinders on, and they're living in a very small bubble that they don't even realize is so small. And I kind of almost like to think of it like animals in the zoo, where they don't even realize that there's an entire world outside of those walls. But that's a lot of them, that maybe that's where they even were born. They've always been in captivity and they're not aware, so they don't even know there's a whole nother world out there. Well, this is the same with the occult and the esoteric. And if you really want to understand, have a deeper understanding of this world and how it works and why we're here and why things are the way they are, you have to get into this and you have to learn it. And it's very challenging. There's, there's so much information, and you'll get conflicting, opinions and stuff, and it's very challenging stuff. But it's equally as important as it is challenging. And so, once again, tying back to being an evolved human being would not be closed-minded and would not dismiss relevant information just because it seems kooky or it seems irrelevant or it seems like it doesn't matter. And I will tell you from personal experience that it does matter. And the symbols that corporations, big ones, use as their logos matters. And the certain rituals or dances or whatever they are, there are certain things out there that have meaning that most people aren't aware of, that we need to educate ourselves and each other on what they mean, etc., so that we can learn how some of these kind of deeper aspects of society or whatever work. And I will also tell you that a lot of it's not good, unfortunately. Some of it is, but a lot of it's not good and is being used for very ill purposes. And that's one thing that we're going to have to educate ourselves on if we want to progress and get out of this horrible situation, this mess that we're in. And we are in a mess. Don't kid yourself. Okay, so that being said, while I'm on the topic of the esoteric and the occult, one of the things that helped me the most in my life, this is the first time I'm mentioning this, especially with the business, but it's something that I don't want to gloss over, is psychedelics. And if you're having a knee-jerk reaction to that right now, I would challenge you to take a second and kind of relax and try not to be too judgy. And note that psychedelics have actually helped so many people in their lives more than you could even imagine. And part of the reason for that is there's a stigma around them, and there's a lot of people that don't even want to talk about it. But they can do amazing things if they're done and they're taken safely, and they're done in a way that is meant to better the person. So in other words, people who just go drop a bunch of acid and then they go to a concert and they just want to look at the pretty colors and whatever. I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but you're not going to get anything out of that. You're not going to become a better person. You're not going to get any real value out of that. Whereas there's certain ways and methods that you can do them where, again, you do them safely, you be careful about dosages, and you also do them kind of with the intent of bettering yourself. And there's ways you can again do meditation. Gosh, excuse me, sorry guys. You can do meditation that is supplemented with psychedelics. You can do psychedelic assisted therapy, which, by the way, they're doing a lot of studies on right now, and they're finding that psychedelic assisted therapy is helping people with serious trauma, people who've gone to war, military vets, people with serious trauma, rape victims, all that nasty stuff. They're finding that it is helping them more than, a year to 2 years of therapy. They're finding that they can condense that to a week or two with the assistance of psychedelics. So this is very real. This is not something that should be ignored or dismissed as hippie woo-woo crap, because it's not. And I can personally tell you that they changed my life more than anything else ever has, and they have given me more than anything else ever has. That being said, of course, I'm not encouraging anyone to break the law. I'm not saying that anyone should do that. There's places that you can go. There's countries that you can go where it's legal to do so. You can go do ayahuasca in South America, for example. And there's at least in some places, the psychedelic assisted therapy is becoming actually legal. So do your research, figure that out. I'm not encouraging anyone to break the law, but that's definitely a huge factor, and they're becoming more and more popular because people are really starting to talk about the benefits of what they can bring. But again, like I said, please consider not doing them if you so choose. I'm not telling anyone I'm not encouraging anyone to do psychedelics. I'm just sharing my story and what could potentially help somebody. If you do, I would really encourage that you do not do them recreationally or do them just to have fun or look at some cool colors. I would really encourage you to go into it with the mindset of improving yourself as a person and understanding more about life and the universe and all that cool stuff. So that being said, let's keep going on. Another aspect of having a strong mind, in my opinion, is what I would call emotional intelligence. Now, this is a huge topic. It could be its own 3-hour video, but basically, some of us are more emotional people than others, but I'm a very emotional person, believe it or not. But we as evolved beings need to have a handle on our emotions and not be so driven by them that they cause us to do irrational things. Emotions can be very, very powerful. They can make us do extremely impulsive things, and they can completely get a grip on us and once again make us do things that are irrational and illogical and don't make sense and can actually be very damaging. I used to have some serious anger problems. And it was very impulsive anger. Like certain things would just trigger me and just make me so mad, and I would just punch things. I'd hurt my hand. I would break things, which of course is expensive and another problem to deal with, which would just make me more mad. And of course, looking back in hindsight, it's just so stupid. It just doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. But it was a serious issue that I had, and that it's there. I think I have a pretty good grip on it now, but it's definitely still there. But that was a real problem that I've been having to work through, and it took a ton of work. It's really hard. It's really painful. Being angry like that is not fun. If you know anybody that has serious anger problems, maybe consider having a little bit of compassion for them, because it is not fun to deal with. I can promise that. But hopefully you're seeing what I'm getting at, that having our emotions completely overrun us isn't a beneficial thing. So we need to have what's called emotional intelligence. We need to have some mastery over our emotions, and that takes work. That takes therapy, and again, meditation, and kind of being in the moment. And if you screw up, where let's say something gets you mad, and then you throw the remote across the room and you break it. Well, when things like that happen, if you care about emotional intelligence and you want to become a more evolved being, you need to not judge yourself when that happened, but you need to notice that something happened, something made you angry, whatever it was. You threw the remote across the room, you broke it. Now you got to go get another one, all that crap. So you need to notice what happened, try to understand why it happened, and then you need to notice the ramifications of what happened. You need to notice that that was not a good, helpful reaction to whatever made you angry, right? And sometimes things are going to get us angry, and sometimes it's out of our control. We're human beings, and that's fine. But I think we can kind of all agree there's definitely times when it can just be taken too far, or where it's not necessary, right? All that stuff. So having some mastery over those emotions is going to improve you as a person and make you a more well-rounded and more evolved human being, right? So kind of, again, almost kind of tying into that is resistance to manipulation. Now, I said it before and I'll say it again. We are living in a world that is full of psychopaths and liars and mean people and evil people and bad people. And I'm sorry to say it, and I don't care if you believe me or not, but a lot of them are in positions of power. And that being said, that trickles all the way down and out. And we have a lot of manipulative people and entities out there. And government, these big companies, they can be very manipulative. People in your life, might be manipulative. Your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your parents, whatever it is. People can be super manipulative. People can have very self-serving agendas and can use some really nasty psychological tricks to try to get what they want from you or whatever. So again, as an evolved human being, you need to have tools in place to resist that and to fight that. Gosh, sorry. Had a couple burps today, apparently. You need to teach yourself and have a very good understanding of psychology so you can understand what these manipulative tricks are, where they're coming from, how they work. So then when they happen in real time, you can recognize them and be aware of them. Things like gaslighting, psychological abuse. I'm kind of surprised at how many people, especially nowadays, have almost no self-worth. How many people are in abusive relationships and question themselves and think they're not good enough or think that they're too ugly for their partner because their partner, says mean things to them or something like that. I mean, you got to find your self-worth and recognize when someone's treating you poorly and how it's affecting your psychology and your life and how you feel, So having that resistance to that manipulation and those psychological attacks is going to be a huge part of being an evolved human. And that takes also, believe it or not, takes work and effort and dedication. So a couple more, almost done here, my friends. So I think coming out of and tied into having a really strong and developed mind is having a healthy moral compass. And that's, really, obviously very important. And that's knowing, what's right and wrong. And not only knowing what's right and wrong, but standing up for it when something happens. And that can be super hard. That can be really challenging. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. I think one of the biggest issues we're seeing nowadays is that people just fall into the herd-like mentality and they believe and do things and whatnot just because everyone else is. And unfortunately, sometimes the right thing to do is not what everyone's doing. Sometimes the right thing to do is a very unpopular opinion that might be met with a lot of resistance. And if you have a true moral compass and you have a strong mind that's developed and a strong will, then you will stand up for what's right even in the face of adversity. You just will. And that is one of the most important and obvious signs of someone who is an evolved being. Someone who's not an evolved being, someone who's undeveloped, is is not going to have that fortitude and constitution. They're just not. And that's up to you to develop that and figure out what's right and wrong for yourself. Don't just think something's right or wrong because your friend believes it or someone else does. This needs to be a personal thing for you that you sort out for yourself. And that takes a lot of contemplation and introspection and all that good stuff. And the last thing, which is a cool byproduct of having a strong mind and having an open mind, is that it gives you some really awesome life experiences. And the reason that is because when you have a strong mind and an open mind, you are willing to entertain certain avenues of life or certain experiences or things that turn out to be awesome. So for example, some of the coolest experiences that I've had in life are backpack elk hunting here in Colorado in the mountains in October, middle to even late October at 12,000 feet, which, is super cold. It can be very uncomfortable. The weather can be crazy. It's very humbling, and it can even be a scary experience, right? So if I had, I guess, what I would kind of consider to be a weaker mind, or a weaker just kind of willpower, then I wouldn't go do that. I'd find an excuse, or I would just road hunt, and go drink beer at night and then go home and sleep in bed or whatever it would be, or I would just not even be interested in it. So having that kind of stronger mind and will to allow myself to go through some suffering and to be cold and to work hard. It's hard work, packing a heavy pack up those mountains and, gaining 2,000 feet of elevation or more in a day with a big heavy pack when it's cold out and it's snowing, you're changing layers all the time and all that. It's really hard, and it takes willpower. But that being said, it's also rewarded with some of the coolest experiences of my life. So that's one of the best byproducts of that. Every single one of these subcategories here has benefits. Like it's all good stuff, but you just have to have that will and interest to improve yourself and to want to become an evolved human being. And then everything from there gets better. And the coolest part about it is it's kind of like a ripple in a pond, where you throw a pebble in a pond and the ripples and the waves go out. And that's what happens is when one of us becomes an evolved human being and one of us becomes the best version of ourselves, then that inspires everybody else to do it. And then, of course, it ideally creates kind of a butterfly effect, right? So I'm going to pretty much end it there. I hope that that's kind of giving you guys a real good idea of where I'm coming from, and also one of the most important, parts of one of the most important inspirations for why I created this company is I want to do my part to help people get there, whether it's selling some of the outdoors and survival and tactical gear that I sell, or doing the classes that I do, like first aid and CPR and concealed carry, and eventually kind of getting into even some more broad topics like teaching people about cryptocurrency. Teaching people about cryptocurrency and off-grid living and all that cool stuff, right? So eventually I want this to be a thing that's really covering a broad variety of topics, and really inspiring people to want to become a well-rounded and evolved being, right? So not just someone who's like really good at fixing cars, right? But everything, all of this put together. Someone who's pretty good at fixing cars, and they're able to defend themselves. And if someone's choking when they're out at dinner, they can save that person, and they are in good shape, and they can come up with cool ideas for their company, right? They're creative. They can come up with cool and innovative ideas to make their company better and make their company make more money, but make better products that people will enjoy, or whatever it is, right? So we want well-rounded, evolved people, and that's so important. And I really do think that as we continue to progress and grow, we're going to do it together, and we're all going to help each other get better and wiser and more intelligent and more interesting. And I really think that we as human beings have so much potential. I really do. And I think that you know, we've got a lot of challenges to face, and I don't think that's going away anytime too soon. But we're going to face them, and we're going to get through them, and we're going to beat them together. And I think that as long as we keep doing that, and we have the will and desire to improve ourselves, then I really do think that I think the possibilities are endless. I mean, I really do think that this is I don't think that there is a ceiling to what we could accomplish or experience together. So that being said, I know it's a little bit of a longer video, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And I enjoyed making it. I really like talking about this stuff. At some point, it might be pretty fun to kind of do more almost podcast type stuff and talk to some friends or folks that I know and have almost more of a banter with this type of stuff, because it's obviously I quite enjoy talking about it, but I also, you know, talking at people is only so enjoyable, right? I mean, I really enjoy more talking with folks and kind of having that more of a dialogue, so might do that. That being said, please let me know what you think. Let me know if you enjoyed it, and if there's anything else that you're kind of interested in me covering, or maybe your own thoughts on the matter and what's some of the stuff that's improved your life. So that being said, once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.